Photo editing, when you think about it, is like any other creative craft. There's always a beginning, a rather messy middle stage where you're trying to figure things out. Then there's a final sprint towards the finish line where you're just adding little optimizations, little tweaks, little touches. I think I spend about as much time thinking about the process of editing images as I do editing actual photos. Actually, let me illustrate something for you. Okay, so just imagine for a moment a clock face, and I'm going to attempt to draw a circle here. God, circles are the hardest things to draw, aren't they? They're always a little lumpy, they're never quite right. So here we have a clock. Now, when you begin editing an image, you're typically starting like right down here, like around, 6 o'clock. So just imagine that you're starting here. Now, when you first start editing an image, what is the first thing that you typically do? What's the first step? Well, most likely you are applying lens correction profiles. You are most likely correcting chromatic aberration, maybe removing vignette, maybe removing some noise, all the fundamental baseline technical things that are typically done in order to create a better straight out of camera raw files so that you can begin your work. And typically for me, that takes me on that journey like right up to, maybe about here, maybe like, 7 o'clock. Then comes what can oftentimes be, for me at least, the most difficult part of the journey, and that is establishing the creative intent of the image. How do I translate that creative intent into adjustments to exposure, to contrast, to hue, to saturation? That is the hard part of this journey that comes next. And typically that, starts like right about here at 7 o'clock and goes all the way up to like, let's say right around here up until like about 10 o'clock. And now's the point at which you are just making small tweaks and optimizations to the image. Now you're going in and fine-tuning things. And that part of the journey then is a rather just nice kind of casual little climb up here to the very top, which is of course high noon. So at high noon, assuming everything went well beforehand, the image should be complete. The image is finished, right? You have gone from 6 o'clock at the very beginning all the way up to the top. Well, I know, and I'm sure many of you know watching this video, it rarely goes this way because there's some things that can happen along the way on this journey. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here is a mistake that I oftentimes make. I will, travel like up to like right around here, like right around like, let's say just like 9 o'clock, something like that. I get to about here. And at this point, I'm looking at the image and I'm feeling pretty good about it. And I'm thinking, yeah, I think this is good. I think this is ready to go. And I stop and I move on to the next image. Or I might do the following. I will, go on this path all the way up to about 10 o'clock. And then I'll just keep going. And then at this phase, which is the optimization phase, right? I'll just keep going and I'll blow right past 12 o'clock. And I'll come back around and I won't realize how far I've traveled. I won't realize how far I've gone until I get out here until like around, 2 o'clock, something like that. Like I have overshot my target. I am way beyond where I was supposed to be. When the editing of an image ends here, the image has been underdeveloped. When the editing of an image ends out here, the image has been overdeveloped. I just simply put too much effort, too much time, too much stuff into the image. Like in my mind, I was somewhere over here when in fact I had gone too far and then I was over here. But then this, stopping over here is also a thing. This is something I do quite frequently as well, where maybe I'm a little hesitant to go too far. Like I don't want to push, the edit too much. I don't want, I don't want to make my edits obvious. Like I want to keep things really simple, really toned down. And I end up not doing enough. And that is when the image gets underdeveloped. Everyone is going to have their own definition of what finished looks like, right? What exactly this is up here. I think for some people, that is totally a gut instinct that is built up, over years of experience and hours of work. You just feel it and like when something is complete. But this is super vague and this is really hard to define. But what's not quite as vague and what I think is easier to define is when an image has been underdeveloped and when an image has been overdeveloped. If it hasn't been underdeveloped and it's not overdeveloped, well, odds are it's probably finished. It's probably somewhere right around here. So let's dive into that. In this video, I'm going to share with you example images that I have underdeveloped and images that I have overdeveloped. One of the things that I do most often when I underdevelop an image, and that is insufficient contrast. For example, take a look at this image here. This is one that I captured about 3 years ago out in California. And this is the before, this is the straight out of camera shot here. Now there are some things about this image, or rather my edit of the image that I do like. The overall like color temperature of the image, the hues in the image. But the thing that I don't like about my edit, and the thing that, you know, in retrospect I now notice, is how soft the contrast is. Because I think at the time I was trying to do something that was a little more filmic, a bit more cinematic, something kind of with almost like a matte finish to it. And I mean, who knows? Some of you right now may be looking at this and thinking, it looks perfectly fine. You know, what's the problem? It's rather one-dimensional. Like I feel like everything is at the same volume level and there's not enough distinction. There's not enough contrast. And I mean, you can see here like how much I dropped the contrast, right? I mean, I just really killed the contrast on this. So if we just, you know, reverse that and take that out, and then maybe bring up the blacks a little bit more like so, maybe raise the whites some, bring down the shadows some, then I begin to feel like we're getting into a better place. Actually, I could probably push the exposure down even more and then put some time into, you know, getting these shadows exactly right. I feel like just those, you know, few changes there are a big improvement over this rather flat, drab, kind of sad image that I initially created. So this image here was taken up in the Canadian Rockies a few years ago. And this image always trips me out because it was probably one of the better images that I created on that trip, and I was there for a number of days. And it was also one of the first images that I captured. Like I just went out onto a frozen lake and I just set up a tripod and boom, like the sky just lit up. I took a photo and, you know, you can't predict these things. Great color, amazing sky. And yet when I got back home and I initially edited this image, I think I was a little afraid of the color. Like, I don't know how else to put it. I think I just kind of looked at this and thought, wow, like the sky's a little bit much and not in a good way. And so I just went in and desaturated a bunch of things. And then much later, I went back and I re-edited the image and came up with this, which to me, in my eyes, is a more successful edit. There is more vibrance, there is more saturation. It looked more like this. It was bright, it was vibrant, it was bold, it was incredible when I was out there in the field and I captured this. And yet for whatever reason, I just completely just sucked all the color out of it. Okay, so another thing I have a habit of doing whenever I underdevelop an image is not take full advantage of the crop tool. I think in retrospect, back when I first got into photography, I viewed the crop tool mainly as a corrective thing, like the kind of tool that I would reach for when I needed to remove something from a photo or change its aspect ratio in order to, you know, fit a particular print size. I didn't see or fully appreciate the creative application of the crop tool, the ways in which the crop tool could improve a composition. This image here is uncropped at its, you know, natural aspect ratio, but you know, if we just bring it in a little bit down here at the bottom and cut off the snow, I feel like it makes a more interesting image graphically. It's not quite as, you know, obvious as it was before, you know, like, oh, these are, you know, trees in the snow. You know, now it actually, you know, more of like an abstract quality to it. It's just a very different looking image now than it was before. Now you might, you know, prefer it uncropped, but this is at least another pathway, another way of interpreting and editing the image that, you know, obviously was created just by applying just a very small crop to it. Next thing I've had a habit of doing when underdeveloping an image is not paying sufficient attention to the shadows. I think sometimes, especially with, you know, images like this one here, I was mainly focused on the highlights and the whites and the you know, especially some of that vignette that I applied to the image. And I wasn't really thinking about the shadows. I think I just kind of looked at the shadows and was like, well, you know, they're dark, they're gonna do what they're gonna do. I just didn't pay any attention to them. When I think for an image like this, being able to see at least some texture and detail. Don't want to go crazy with it, but just being able to see, you know, some texture and detail there instead of just crushing everything down to black. Like, let's see if we can just quickly fix this. You know, obviously one really simple way to do that is just to raise the black point like so. Just bringing up the black slider, which reveals a little more texture, a little more detail. Now, of course, when doing that, the contrast of the image begins to fade a little bit. You get the idea, because now we're able to see like some of the texture in the sea stack here, some of the texture in the landscape back here. And I could probably also improve this by, maybe pulling out some of that vignette that I was talking about earlier so that the blacks don't get quite so crushed. So again, this one here kind of, straddles the line between under and over development. It's going to be different for different people. I usually do this when under developing, but anyway, something I have a habit of frequently doing. Okay, another thing that I've caught myself doing when, going back through old images and finding ones that have been underdeveloped, one of the things that I've had a bad habit of doing is creating dim whites. Now this kind of ties into another video that I recently made here on my channel about negative highlights, how negative highlights, when used in an image that just really doesn't need negative highlights, they can desaturate the image. They can cause whites to turn rather soft and gray and kind of ugly, quite honestly. If you want to check out that video, I will link to it over here if you'd like to check that out after this one. But let's take a look at an example here. So this is another image of mine from a trip up to Canada. And for whatever reason, when I first edited this thing, I don't know. I think I was going for something kind of dark, kind of moody with it. I mean, notice what I did with the highlights here. I dropped the highlights down to like -23 when there was, plenty of room up here at the top of the histogram. There was no reason and no benefit from dropping the highlights. There was no detail to retain. There was nothing for it, no impact at all. And yet I think I did it just purely out of habit, just dropped the highlights because I thought it would have some kind of net benefit. It doesn't really look like snow, right? This is one of the problems when exposing for snow. Sometimes it's really easy to underexpose snow because the camera just, makes the snow equal to middle gray when you take an image. But look at how much of an impact this makes just by bringing up the whites, just by, punching up the whites a little bit. Something else I forgot to do back when I first edited this image was I forgot to enable, or I just didn't think about enabling profile corrections. Now, I think this is on by default now in Lightroom, if I'm correct. I believe back in the day, like a few years ago, this was disabled by default and you had to purposely go in and enable it if you wanted lens corrections in your image. But you can see how much of an impact that is having on the whites in the image and the overall tonality of the image. It's getting rid of that vignette. I think it's creating a nicer looking image. And the whites are looking much better now than they were before. They were looking rather grim, rather dim in my first edit. In just a moment, I'm going to share with you 5 classic signs of images that have been overdeveloped, but I need to take a break for a second and talk about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Well, as you may have noticed at the beginning of this video, I am not the most skilled illustrator in the world, but check this out. If I head over to Skillshare and do a search, there are hundreds of videos on this topic taught by experienced instructors, teaching everything from the basics of character animation to hand-drawn lettering and typography, something that I've always liked, in addition to a class that helps anyone be a better visual communicator using illustration, something that I probably should have brushed up on. But anyway, whatever you may be into, Skillshare has a class that will help you learn more and improve your skills. And the good news is you can try it out free for 30 days. Think about all the new things you could learn in that time. Check out Skillshare for yourself by using the link provided down below in the video description to get 30 days free. Thanks so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's take a look at some of the common signs of an image that has been overdeveloped, overbaked, overcooked, just left in the oven too long. It came out rather crispy. Images where I should have stopped much sooner, but for whatever reason, I just kept going and adding more things to it, thinking it was going to make the image better, when in fact it actually made the image worse. First sign of an image that's been overdeveloped: monochromatic color. For example, this landscape image here, which I captured about 4 years ago, this is the straight out of camera raw image here. And then when I got back from my trip, this was my initial edit of the image. Now, creatively, in my own defense here, I was trying to, get a look that was almost similar to, like, say, what like the Mars rover would have captured, something that had more of like a otherworldly kind of feel to it. The problem though in doing that is that it created a rather monochromatic image. There's just there's just no color. Like, well, there is color, but it's all basically one hue, and then just, neighboring, closely associated hues nearby. And by the way, this is actually a very common thing. This is actually a good thing to do, especially in landscape photography, a lot of times, to kind of bring down the noise in the image, to bring down some of the visual just busyness of the image when there's a lot of colors in it. One of the things that can help kind of calm the image down and give it a little more creative intent is to bend the hues closer towards one another. So for example, you could take yellow, push it a little more towards orange, and take orange and bend it a little more towards yellow. And then you get, then there's more harmony between the hues in the image. But I feel like when an image has been overdeveloped, when, getting a little too clever with that technique, well, you end up with a rather drab, rather monochromatic image like this one. This is something that, I really had to unlearn. And when I went looking around for an image to use as an example, I stumbled across this one here. I just about died when I saw this. I mean, I looked at this, I was like, what in the hell was I thinking when I edited this image originally? Now, it may not look that bad, on screen here, but let me just zoom in here and show you what I'm talking about. I mean, just look at these trees here, and look at the side of the mountain here, and see how there's just all this micro contrast, all these jagged edges in it. Just all this just obnoxious micro contrast that's been added to the image here. And there's other problems here too. The vignette is weird, and it's just not good. It's not a good edit at all. Man, I mean, the ground down here just looks like wormy. You see that? I mean, it does not look natural at all. What did the image look like originally? Well, here is the original straight out of camera image zoomed in here. And then this was my first edit of it. I just completely destroyed the image. I don't know what I was thinking, but as you can see, totally different image. I mean, this image is so overbaked in so many different ways, not just with clarity and sharpness, but yeah, it's pretty bad. All right, the next common sign of an image that has been overdeveloped: unrealistic shadows. Now, to clarify, I do not believe that realism is necessarily a requirement for a successful image. Anything but. Because let's face it, I mean, reality is rather boring, right? I mean, who wants to always live in reality? Who wants to always see things as they actually are? I mean, that's part of the role of the photographer and the role of the artist. But, even with the best of intent, sometimes it just, quite simply doesn't work out. For example, this image here, this is actually a very recent one. I actually shot this just a few months ago out in Alabama Hills in California. And the thing that I was trying to do creatively with this image when I first returned home and I started editing it, I was trying to give the image kind of a light, airy desert kind of pastel, something that, felt more like sand, like the luminous nature of sand. I, injected some warmth into the shadows here, so there wasn't as much color separation. So there wasn't as many cool tones in the shadows. And I guess in that sense, I did succeed at editing the image that way. But the thing that bugs me about this photo now, after, weeks later after looking at it, is that I just don't feel like the shadows, it's just something about it where I feel like I just pushed the shadows entirely too far. I mean, you can see that there was some light here. There was some light that was kind of bouncing around and was, filling in these shadows here, but I completely lost the highlight here, and the highlight on the side of this, rock formation here, and everything just got completely washed out, and there's just no distinction between anything. It really depends on the image, but for this particular image here, I felt like I just got a little too happy with the shadow slider, and that's something I catch myself doing, and I oftentimes live to regret it. Okay, the next classic sign of an image that has been overdeveloped is too much vignette. Now, I am not one of those anti-vignette people. I know they're out there. Maybe you're actually one of them, but there are some people some photographers and videographers and filmmakers too, who just genuinely believe that Things like vignette and film grain, these are holdovers from the past, that they play no role in today's modern digital world with the high quality cameras and lenses that we now have. And I do understand, the viewpoint there, but I do believe at the same time that vignette can be a very effective tool for guiding the viewer's eye exactly where you want their eye to go, where you want their attention to be in the image, by minimizing the areas that aren't as important in order to bring more attention to the areas that are important. But I want to show you an example here from the past. So this is an image of mine from a long time ago from a trip to Italy. And, I think like in the world of photography, it is, oh man, there's something about these, like in Cinque Terre, there's something about these old fishing villages with these, multicolored homes and everything that just really makes people go crazy with the saturation and the vibrance tool, and they just crank it up. Some of the most over-processed images I think I've seen are ones of the Italian coast. But anyway, I was absolutely guilty of the same when I developed this image originally, because you can see here just how much darkening I applied all the way around the outside, and the sky just turned like this really dark blue as a result, because there's so much vignette that's been applied here. And in my own defense, I was trying to, direct the viewer's eye to the middle, but it was not a very elegant touch. Let's put it that way. So let's just fix this by, bringing the vignette back up. And I'm just going to slowly bring it back up. Actually, this would probably be easier. Let me just turn it off altogether. So now you can actually see why I applied vignette originally to this image, because there is, some very, bright areas over here on the right side of the cliff, and on the left side over here a little bit too, whereas the center is a little bit dim. So by applying some vignette around the edge, it actually balanced the image out tonally. It brought, the edges of the photo closer to the tonality of the middle, but it was a very heavy-handed way of going about doing that. My advice, if you're looking at your image and you're looking at the vignette that you've applied to it, and it literally feels like, like you're looking through a tube like that, like a periscope. When it comes to vignette, a little goes a long way. I think the best kind of vignette is the kind that's pretty much invisible, like the kind that you just don't even notice. Like you may feel it, you may sense it, but it's not something that you can, point to and, and immediately notice when you look at an image. All right, so next classic sign of an image that's been overdeveloped: too many local adjustments. And by local adjustment, I'm talking about masking tools like, the radial gradient, the linear gradient, the brush tool, being able to select the sky and select a subject automatically, luminosity masks, all that stuff. These things that are added to an image in order to adjust tonality, in order to dodge and burn and, inject light or remove light from, different localized areas within the image. And trust me, I love those tools, as much as anyone else. They're fantastic, especially with outdoor photography, landscape photography, where you can't control the light. Right? You have no control over it. So, unless you go out and rent a cherry picker or something and put it up in the air with a spotlight and do some light painting or something like that, you have no control. So the only control that you have is after the fact with these tools. And the problem that I know I have is that sometimes I kind of fall into that trap, similar to what I was talking about with the vignette tool. You start to kind of cross this threshold of believability at a certain point where you look at the image, and I know I've done this where I have an image that, it no longer looks like a photograph. Like it actually looks a little more like, almost like digital art. Like it looks too manipulated, too manicured. There's not enough imperfection in the image. Like I took too much of the imperfection out and perfected it too much. And then it no longer looks real. So anyway, this video's been going on for a while. I don't feel like, we necessarily need to see an example of that. You know what I'm talking about. But my advice is just to, sometimes I almost feel like starting a timer when I, start applying local adjustments and luminosity masks to an image to keep myself under control, to keep myself from going too far with it, because man, it's so easy. It's so easy to do. That's it for me. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. If you would like to keep in touch with me in the future and be notified of new product reviews, new tutorials, new articles that I've written, please take a moment and subscribe to this channel down below. You can also head over to my website at todddominey.com, and you can sign up for my weekly email newsletter that I put out. A newsletter that actually oftentimes contains stuff that doesn't appear here on my YouTube channel. So if that would be of interest to you, you'll find a link down below in the description. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I'll see you next time.